Greetings everyone, and welcome to My Little Coffin. In today's video, we will be analyzing the design choices of one of Digimon's most popular antagonists, Myotismon. Charming, flamboyant, and irresistibly bad to the bone, let's take a look at why Myotismon is such an interesting and memorable design. Let's start off with a particularly long segment of What's in a Name? In the original Japanese dub, this Digimon's name is Vamdamon, a mix of the words vampire and demon. Both words refer to malevolent creatures of the night, having inspired fear in the hearts of men for countless millennia and across all cultures. Depending on the where and the when, vampires have taken on a variety of different names and forms. No matter what they were called, all these monsters relied on consuming the life force of their victims to survive. It was only as recently as the late 1800s when a more globally known interpretation of vampires started gaining momentum. They can now shapeshift into bats, sleep in coffins, have no reflections, and are exclusively nocturnal. They have also gained a popular set of weaknesses, like being vulnerable to sunlight, garlic, the crucifix, and holy water. These traits were meant to inspire fear among citizens while also propagating the influence of the Catholic Church. Irish author Bram Stoker most famously pushed all these legends into the mainstream when he published the iconic Dracula novel. The titular character, Dracula, has since become the mold for all other fictional vampires to aspire to, including Digimon's very own Vamdamon. So now we know more about Vamdamon, but what about Myotismon? Let's take a look at the key word here, myotis, which is a Latin word that was derived from the ancient Greek word for mouse? I mean, I get that some people think that bats are just rodents with wings, but what are we really talking about here? Actually, Myotis is a genus of bats identified by their distinctly shaped ears. These are the mouse-eared bats. Many species of mouse-eared bats are commonly found across much of Europe, as well as the Middle East. But then, what about vampire bats? Wouldn't that actually be more appropriate? After all, just like the monsters they were named after, vampire bats feed exclusively on blood. I was wondering the same thing at first, but then I did a little more research. Out of the 1,400 known species of bats, only 3 of them feed on blood. And all 3 vampire bat species are only found in South America. Yes, the geography matters because there is a historical set of details to contextualize this. Before vampire bats were even first studied, the use of the word vampire in the folkloric context actually precedes the use of the word vampire in a zoological context. In other words, vampires in folklore were already a thing long before anyone even knew about the existence of hematophagous bats. So this means vampire bats were named after vampires of myth and not the other way around. But what does this have anything to do with the insectivorous mouse-eared bats? Well, since we now know that vampire myths have been around since before we knew about vampire bats, then the bats that were first associated to vampires are the bats that also share the same geographical origins of these myths. Remember when I said that mouse-eared bats are found all across Europe? You know what else is in Europe? Romania. The country most famously used as the setting for Dracula stories, and also for nearly every other vampire story after that. And what's so special about Romania? Besides the people and the culture, which I'm sure are great, Romania is well known as a haven for bats. And as it turns out, the most common types of bats flying through the Romanian skies are the bats belonging to the Myotis genus. Yeah, that was a lot to go through just to properly contextualize this Digimon's name, but vampires, bats, and vampire bats are all such interesting topics. Anyway, thank you for sticking with this special segment of What's in a Name? As interesting as his name might be, Myotismon's appearance has just as much to tell. To put it simply, while he is indeed loosely modeled after classical depictions of Dracula, he's also got an edgy look that was a rather common trope to 90s character designs. Pale skin, elongated fangs, and a large dramatic cape are all derivative of classic vampiric design. That being said, he is quite a bit more colorful than the typical vampire. While not exactly bright and gleeful, his blue suit provides a nice contrast to the red underside of his cape. Similarly, his darkened lips and red mask further exaggerate the paleness of his face. Speaking of exaggeration, Vamdemon's limbs are disproportionately big. These ragdoll proportions are interestingly shared as a design element by other notable Digimon villains. In the case of Vamdemon specifically, his ragdoll arms and legs ironically help bring balance to his strange physique. With such a dramatic cape, having such large limbs help put a lot of attention to his poses in illustrations or his movements in animation. And boy, what a poser he is. In nearly every official art depicting Vamdemon, he's always doing some kind of dramatic gesture. His animations are, not surprisingly, full of personality as well. Now, a large part of his characterization is his arrogance and sense of entitlement. In the original Digimon Adventure anime, he intends to rule over the real world simply because he believes he deserved to do exactly that. This is a rather cliched take on the villainous role, but he does it pretty convincingly. And as a villain, Myotismon's turn to antagonize the Digidestined made for one of the best story arcs in the franchise's history. With a total of 18 episodes, he also had the longest run as a villain in the original Digimon Adventure. While he did amass an army to help him with his takeover and also to do his bidding, he isn't above playing a more proactive role when he has to. But he's as cruel as they come, and he's more than willing to destroy even his own servants if he deems them to no longer be of use to him. He exhibited classical vampiric traits such as his weakness to sunlight, consuming blood from human victims, and his association to bats. But as he is a Digimon, he has powers that go beyond myths. He has a talent in the mystic arts like being able to engulf a city within an inescapable fog. His most well-known signature move is Night Raid, in which he summons a swarm of bats to cause severe damage to his target. He can also use Bloody Stream to strike enemies with red energy whips. And his Dead Scream is a spell that can paralyze his target, leaving them vulnerable. He is particularly powerful even when compared to other Digimon of the same level, capable of fending off every Digidestined's partner Digimon until Angelwomon finally appeared. But just like any vampire, Vamdemon still ultimately succumbs to the power of divine intervention. For the most part, his time as an antagonist played heavily to his vampiric design elements. It was only when he further evolved into Venom Myotismon when the more demonic aspects of his design were embraced. Truly, his appearance was heavily biblical, but Venom Vamdemon also deserves his own design analysis for another video on another day. We have made it to the end of the video. Doing a design analysis for Myotismon was a lot tougher than I thought, but it was also extremely educational as I learned so much about vampiric mythology, history, and even bat zoology. If you made it this far, thank you so much for sticking with me in this particularly long overview. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel for more content. Thank you so much for watching, and train hard, tamers!